Hello and welcome to DJ Tutorials. And today we're going to be going over the Radeon ProRender render engine for Blender. So I'm on the AMD website right now, and if you do a quick Google search for AMD Radeon ProRender, you should be able to find it just fine. And it's available for a lot of different 3D software, but we are going to scroll down to the area that concerns us, which is Blender. So you see right here, it's AMD Radeon ProRender plugins. You click on this Learn More button here. And if we scroll down, actually, it's right here. So if you scroll down a little bit, you will find the section where it says Download Now. Click on that, and it will open up this page here. And I will provide this link in the description below so that you can just quickly just jump there. But if you ever need to look for it, you can easily just do a quick search. So when you scroll down, you'll see there's a whole bunch of options here. If you're using Windows, Mac, or Linux, it's available. And we're only concerned with the Windows right here. Let me just get rid of this down here. I'm going to do this as a fresh install just for everybody. So you click on Windows, since I'm using Windows, and we're also going to click on this button here, which is the material library. So Radeon ProRender has its own material library with a lot of presets that are really fantastic to get you really up and going quickly with this engine. And it's really good to also show you kind of how the basics of their node system works, or their shaders. So if you just click on this right here, it will start downloading another one. And don't worry, I've used this for a couple years now in beta testing and stuff like that. And so far, no issues with viruses or malware or anything like that. So don't worry. Now, I like to hold in on my computer uh, a location specifically designated towards my Blender add-ons, which I would recommend that you guys do. So if I once it's finished downloading, which the materials it's going to take a little bit of time, but if you take the zip file here from your downloads, and for me, I'm placing it right here. I'm going to replace it since I've already have one in there. You'll see right here the zip file is there. It says a 3 because I've already done it before in my downloads. Um, but it should look for you something like this, and it's just a zip file. Now, you're not going to be installing this add-on the same way as other Blender add-ons where you do it from within. It actually has its own built-in Windows add-on feature. So if you double-click, there's a Windows installer package right here. So once you've gone inside there and you're ready to install, just double-click, and it's going to prompt you like this here, and you'll just hit Next. Accept. There's really nothing, crazy in here. You don't have to buy a license or anything like that. It's an open license for you to use. They do request that you tag your renders with the ProRender engine so that they can, tell people about it through your work. But really, you don't have to do that. Hit the next button, and then here's where it's a little funky. If you have multiple versions of Blender that you have downloaded throughout the years, like I have, you might see something like this. But really, all you got to do is make sure that this top one is selected, hit Next, and then install. Make sure you don't have Blender open as well. It will prompt you to, if you have Windows, blocking and firewall and stuff like that, it will prompt you if it's okay to install it. Just hit yes, and just be patient. There will be a Python script that jumps out shortly. I've obviously done this quite a few times, so just be patient and let it do its thing. Even if the status bar doesn't increase like it is on mine, it is actually doing something, so just be patient. And there was the Python script, and in the background it will run a Python script that will help with the installation process, and there you go. So you are now finished, so hit finish. Now, before we open up Blender, we are going to also install the materials library just to make it easy so that when we jump in there, everything's going to be already set and ready for us. Now, at this point, I'm going to tell you guys about a little bit of an issue that I ran into with this engine. And it has to do with actually a pretty great feature that used to be in the in the engine before, which was the ability to use Nvidia graphics cards and the um, AMD graphics cards at the same time for your viewport renders and your final renders. Now, last time I tried to do this, which was I think about 6 months ago, it was completely broken. Where if you had an Nvidia card and an AMD card installed into your computer, it would not work. It would actually crash Blender. So I will show you towards the end of the video how to resolve that issue so that you can open up Blender and not have any problems. So just stay tuned for that. So if we then are ready to install our Radeon Pro material library, you just double click the downloaded Windows installer, you hit next, accept the terms of agreement, make sure that it's in the same location, the Radeon ProRender or this top selection here, hit next and then install. And basically it's just going to take a bunch of um, materials, presets, and images that you can actually use for creating your own materials and textures. So it's a pretty great resource even just for that. So once you've installed Radeon ProRender in the materials library, go ahead and open a new Blender file. And this is just the default cube. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over and we're going to change the render engine. So click on the render properties tab over here on the right, and then where it says render engine, select the Radeon ProRender. You'll notice that some things have changed over here on the right. All you really need to do right now is I'm going to set this minimum to 16 for the samples here, and we're going to just make sure that we have a rendering device. So I'm going to use my Radeon 7 here. And I've noticed that using one video card works better than using multiple, at least in my situation. Maybe for you, you have some lower powered or older cards, and you using multiple is good for you. So do what works best for you. One thing I'm going to say before we begin using this render engine is that it is quirky and it is a work in progress, and it requires a lot of users to give some feedback to the developers. So make sure that you understand that before you start using this engine. It's really one of those things that I think every artist should have a lot of tools in their arsenal to use, and this render engine has a lot of potential, and there are things that you can use it for right now for specific projects you might be working on that work better for you. So that being said, just keep in mind that we may run into a couple bugs or a couple strange things that I'll tell you some workarounds with. But just keep that in mind while we're working on this. So the first thing you'll notice is that there is a tab up here, or a drop down up here on the top. And when we click this, it opens up a set of drop downs here. So render quality, full, high, medium, and low, and the render mode. Basically, you can choose different ways of rendering. Now, because we are doing a very brief overview of this render engine, I'm only going to be covering the render qualities in this area. Render mode, you can play with those if you'd like. It's only available in the full render quality. Just to, let you know that. But if you are interested in playing with these, by all means, go ahead and play with these and see what they do. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to leave it on full, and I'm going to open up or add a ground plane here, apply the scale, and then I'm just going to, let me just make sure my screencast keys are here, so if you're following along with me, you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to move this cube up, and you can see the viewport's the same, nothing has changed, and that's because we're not in a rendered view yet. So if we then change to the rendered view, you'll see that this is very similar to what you have seen in the Cycles engine. So you see this grain, that's because it is a ray tracing engine. And I'm talking about the full one here, full render quality. It's a ray tracing engine. So I'm not going to go into the details on ray tracing and the rasterizing engines. Just know that ray tracing calculates bounces from rays of light, And the raster, which uses these other settings here, the raster engines like EEVEE and gaming engines, uses an approximation of where items are within a scene to give you an idea about what that might look like, but it's not as realistic as a ray tracer. You'll notice that we have the lamp up here, which you can move around and it will update as you move it. If we go over to our object data properties, which for this it's a lamp currently, and we change this to a spotlight, you'll see that it changes to a spot, just like you would see in EEVEE or cycles, and the sun lamp will change to a sun lamp, and an area light will change to an area light with the different ways that you can use this area light shaping with sizes and everything else. So you have a lot of versatility there. I will tell you right off the bat, you also have the point light here, which is what it started with. I'll tell you right off the bat, the lamp system within this render engine is not as robust as Cycles. It's a work in progress, like I said. So IES lights, as far as I've tried to use them, don't really work that well with this render engine. And if you don't know what that is, that's fine. Just know that if you're trying to have very complicated lighting setups, maybe this isn't the right engine for you. But you can get really good results just using these basic uh, lamps that they have built in. Let's now look at the world properties. So go over to the world properties and you'll see that there is an environmental light. The environmental light is basically your background, and you can change the color to whatever you'd like, red or blue or white or whatever it is. And you can change to a sun and sky, which is a procedural system that will build a horizon line, and you can play with these settings here to give yourself a somewhat, or at least a more realistic look for an environment than just a plain color that we saw here. But really what you want to do is you want to use the IBL here. IBL, all it means is image-based lighting, so that's for your HDR eyes, so high dynamic range images, or any sort of 360-degree images that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and open up an HDRI here, and we're just going to do this basic Studio Small here, which I got from HDRI Haven. So if you haven't used that yet, please go to hdrihaven.com and you can download a whole bunch of great HDRIs for free and donate based on what you have available as far as funds. So once you have your IBL put in, you can change with this gizmo here. You can rotate it and move it around. You can change the background override, so you can actually show, let's say, a black in the background, but it's still using that HDRI to light the scene. You're just not seeing the background there. And you can change it to another color if you wish for whatever your reasons might be that you want to do that. But you can see that even if I would do the blue here for the background, it doesn't change the actual lighting situation of the scene. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off now. And there's all sorts of things you can do in here. You can feel free to play with these as you wish, and these will change the way that your objects are rendering within the scene. If you want to add a little bit of a fog effect, you can go down here and you can click on this Create Fog object. I'm going to go ahead and save this file now, just to make sure that there are no crashes, because sometimes a crash might occur. So we're going to create a fog object, and you can see that it has created a volumetric cube here that encompasses our scene. And if I go to the rendered view now, you can see that now there is a fog effect happening within the scene. So that's a way that you can use that you can create that nice volumetric look if that's what you're looking to do, and you can create it very easily here uh, using that button. I went ahead and deleted it just because it slows everything down, and really we don't need it any longer. So the next thing that I want to show you is how to add some materials here. And the materials can be very tricky to learn when you're used to how the cycles and the EV engine use materials and how you can use procedural textures and stuff like that. And what I want to do is just show you some really, really basic materials and how the different views, the render qualities, treat those materials. I'm going to go to solid mode here, and I'm going to go over to our shading tab. And you'll notice that if you go into the shading tab, it's using the material preview function, and you can see that HDRI built-in background here. So you can see that it's using this one here. We can change that to this studio. We can change it to this interior scene here. So you still have that function within the Radeon ProRender engine, but you're going to be seeing it shaded the way that you've had it selected here. And we're just going to keep it on full just to show you a couple main things. But I'm not going to use this mode here. I'm just going to go to the rendered view because I'd like to see how this background is going to have the materials react to it. So first I'm going to add a floor, and if you click on the floor and then you go over to your materials library browser, if you go to the materials properties, you'll see that there's this little set here. And in this drop down, you can see there's all these materials that you can choose from that are already built in. For the sake of keeping this easy to begin with, I'm just going to put in something simple like this paint here, and we'll make it red, and we'll import the material. And you can see that it has automatically created a material on the ground, and we can see how that looks. So that's pretty great. Let's go ahead and choose the cube, and we are going to take a look at how it is dealing with this material. So on the floor, I'm just going to change this to floor. So it's a floor material. And when I click on the cube, it already has the preset material from when you open up the Blender file. And you can see that it's shading it just fine. You know, it's using the principled BSDF that's built into Blender. And the shading is fine. You can change the roughness values. You can change the specularity values. You can change all of the values here, changing the color. You can change whatever you want with this BSDF node. Now, one of the great things about, in my opinion, about this shading engine or this render engine is it's the Radeon ProRender's shading node, the Uber node that they use. And if you go over here on the right and you look at the surface drop down, you'll see this button here that says Convert Principled to Uber. And this is a very easy way to basically convert your Blender BSDF node to the Uber node that's built into Radeon ProRender. Now, just a note, if you go to EEVEE or if you go to Cycles, the RPR Uber node will not function. You will not see a proper shading result. So just keep that in mind. There are certain things built into this shading engine that are not going to be cross, I guess, cross engines, you can say. You won't be able to use this floor material in Cycles. It will just show up black or something like that, or you'll just get an error. So if we click this button here, you'll see that it has converted whatever we had from the Uber, or from the principled BSDF here. It has now converted it to a RPR Uber node. So if you already had something set up in this one here before, you now have a Uber node. And there's a lot of stuff in here. Feel free to play with it. I'm going to be doing a longer series on how to use these nodes and all that. And really, the best way to understand how this node works is to play with it and see what all the sliders do when you click certain things. I'll show you a couple, easy things to do to get a material where you want it, but really the best way is to play with it. So the other thing you can do besides just playing with it is you can go over and you can actually choose a different material and see how they've handled some of this stuff. So if I go over here and instead I choose, let's say, a glass, okay? You can see that when I choose glass, there's a bunch of different options here and it shows you what it kind of looks like. Let's go with this one. I'm going to import that, and if we take a look at it, you can see that this is how they have set up this Uber node to make the shading look like this. Pretty basic and straightforward as far as the material, but it looks pretty nice. Now let's do one that has a actual image texture used. Like, let's take a look at this glass used one here. And this one is using a image map for the reflection, for the roughness, and it's using a bump map to create a normal here. And it also has a refraction color. So definitely a different looking glass here. It's kind of ugly, but I just wanted to show you that the nodes inside of Radeon ProRender are a bit different. They say RPR on it. And when you go to add, you can see that there are certain things like RPR, procedural UV, RPR lookup, etc. Now, when we're jumping between different modes here, and it took me a while to really see how this was all working, if I change this, I'm going to save real quick. If I change this to a low setting, and you go to the rendered view, this is now using the raster engine. And you can see that there is what appears to be some sort of image texture put on there, but it's just really not as high quality as we saw on the ray tracer. Then if we change this from low to a medium, you can see that it has added the refraction. So you can see the refractions there. However, it just no longer has the uh, it no longer has those issues from the low, but it also doesn't have the detail quality from the other. And you can see that the floor is not quite as nice looking either. Then, when we change the render quality to high, you'll notice something very different happens. And what high does is it's actually a mixture between ray tracing and a raster engine. So it's sort of like that new RTX idea that the new video cards like Nvidia are going with, and video games where they're adding some ray trace elements to a rasterized engine. So this may work for you on what you're working on, or if you just like to see what the ray tracing might look like, but without super high detail quality, and because you have a lower powered graphics card or CPU or whatever the situation might be, this might help you out for just visualizing what it might look like with the ray tracer on, and where certain things like the caustics are being cast or light and shadow, things like that. So when we go back to the full setting, we can see what the overall ray trace would look like again with basically everything put in as far as all of the uh, textures. So I will make a note that when you go from full to medium, you might run into an issue, which hopefully it'll happen right now. There it is. So you'll see that this looks like the low setting. And for some reason, when you go from full to medium again, without going to low first, it does that. I don't really know why. It's a bug that I'll probably do a report on soon. But all you have to do is just go to the low setting and then go to the medium setting, and it will be set up just correct, or the right way that you can expect to see it. Now, a benefit, and I'm going to shift over here to the regular layout view, and I'm going to save. The benefit of utilizing this medium view over EEVEE, even though it's not as high detailed with, I'll tell you right now, you can't really use, oh, see, it did it again. So I'm going to go to low, and then I'm going to go back to medium. You can see that the roughness maps and the normal maps really aren't being projected onto this cube anymore. And I will tell you that that is definitely a drawback in comparison to EEVEE. But the really good thing about this engine, it doesn't require a whole lot of processing power to really get these images. So if you're doing something that you really want to just be kicked out super quick and not have a whole lot of detail in the scene, this is a very good engine to do that. Or if you're doing a animation where you're not going to be using a whole lot of roughness and normal maps and all that kind of stuff, and you're doing some sort of stylized animation or something like that, this might be the perfect way for you to go. One of the other things that I think is a really great benefit is that if I duplicate this refraction object and I put it, let's say, behind it here, you can actually see the refraction object behind there. I'm going to change the background so that you can see this a little bit easier with a brighter background. But basically, the idea is that you can actually see refraction objects through one another. And in EEVEE, when you use their raster engine, a refraction object or anything that has refraction shading does not, you won't be able to see it. It's kind of like like transparent or invisible. You'll be able to see the shadow behind it, but you won't be able to see the actual refracted object. And you can check out one of my videos that actually goes into a little bit more detail on that specific issue that EEVEE has. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the render settings. So if you go over and you check out the sampling information over here on the render properties, you can see that there are a bunch of settings here. And there's a minimum, there's a max, there's a noise threshold, and there's a samples per view update. Now I have specific settings that I like to use, but before we do anything with that, I'm just going to do a test render to show you the basics on how this works. So we're going to keep this at 150, this at 116, and I'll explain to you what some of this stuff means. All right, so once you're ready to render, all you have to do is hit F12, just like you would be rendering anything else, and you'll notice that the way that this engine renders is that it uses one large tile. Instead of a small tile-based system, it does the whole frame. So what that means is this system is much different than cycles. And I find that it's actually much, much faster for whatever reason. Now you see this 17% that says adaptive sampling right up here. It just went away. What that means is if we go over here and we look at the noise threshold and we look at the min and max, what that's saying is when you are rendering, if an area after it has 16 samples has enough data to where it meets this noise threshold setting, it will stop rendering that section and move on to the other areas like this that need more samples in order for it to not look as noisy. So you have a lot of versatility as far as where you want to set the noise or how much noise is acceptable for your particular image. I'm going to go ahead and turn off some of this compositing stuff that I have just so that it looks more like the actual render straight from the program or the render engine. So this is what it looks like right out. And you can see that there's still a lot of grain. There's grain here, there's a lot of grain here, and that's okay because this is really just a quick render to show you what's going on. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to show you using this. This is the Adrenaline uh, GPU sort of like monitoring system that they have. And this is for AMD users, Nvidia users. You will have to use something else, probably MSI Afterburner or something like that. But if you see here, there are some peaks and valleys, and basically all this is saying is when we ran our render, the GPU was going up and down. And what that means is that it doesn't have a very stable way of rendering. And this is more of what you would see if you were rendering using cycles. There is usually a lot of peaks and valleys when you're rendering. I'm not just saying this just to, tell you extra information. There is a lot of information that you can pull from this. And I'll show you how you can make or optimize your render settings using this engine. So if we go over here to the samples per view update, and we change this to 150, matching our max samples here. So samples per view update is 150, and the max samples is 150, and we go ahead and run that. You're going to see that we are not having an updated view here. And that's because we set it to only update once it reaches that 150 samples. However, take a look at this last one. It said 27.19 seconds for that last render. And look at the current one. It only took 17.43 seconds for this one. And if we take a look at our monitoring software, you can see where these peaks and valleys were. You're not seeing that on this particular render. It stays up, it uses the GPU for the whole time, and then stops as soon as this render is completed. And that is one way that you can optimize your renders to increase the speeds using this particular render engine and the settings over here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can change the render settings uh, for the different views. So all you really need to do is, and I'm going to turn on the previewer just so that we make sure there's no issues. If you wanted to run a animation or for whatever reason you're doing a still image with a really low setting, you just change the quality to low, and there would be your low, and you just hit F12 again and go to medium, and you hit F12 here. And if you wanted to use their hybrid version of ray tracing plus the raster engine, you would want to use this one. Now, there are some blown out parts of this image, the glass down here and all that, that's because I did not set this render up for this particular lighting setup. But you can see that that these are some options for you when you're rendering. Take note here, if you look at the background, right here, there is the background light from the HDRI. But if we change this from high to full, it's not there. And that's because for whatever reason, the HDRI is flipped 180 degrees in when you go between the full and the high or medium or low settings. It's a bug. It shouldn't be there. And again, this is a work in progress render engine, so there might be a couple weird quirks like that. It really isn't that much of an issue. All you have to do is slide around the HDRI using the gizmo in the world settings. But just keep that in mind if you find that your lighting is like jumping around and being weird. That is something that you need to be aware of. The next thing I'll talk about very briefly is that it does have a denoising set of tools you can use. If you go over to the view layer properties, you can see there's a bunch of passes here. And if you're in VFX, just a side note, if you're in VFX, this is great because this allows you a lot of versatility on what you can render out for your deliverables. But we're going to ignore that right now. And we're going to go over to this little drop down here that says RPR denoiser. Now this only really works on the full sample, so you need to make sure that you're set to that to use these. And if you click this on, it will use these different filter types. So there's machine learning, there's a local weighted regression, there's all these different versions here. The only one that really seems to work out pretty good for me is the machine learning. And if you look on the actual viewport here, you can see that it's applied that denoise. And the texture right here is not the greatest. It's because there's only 64 samples, so it's trying to blend and blur it in so there's no noise. But you can see this metallic object looks okay, and the sphere down here looks okay. So really, it's dependent on the amount of samples that you have and what's going on in your scene. Sometimes this doesn't work very well, and in fact, I would say that the cycles denoising through the compositor works excellently compared to some of the options in Radeon ProRender. But these are options available to you, and because of the fact that the ray tracing engine on this particular in Radeon ProRender is so fast, I would actually prefer if I could get a project to where it really works well in Radeon ProRender. It's preferable to render using this engine specifically because of the speed of this ray tracer and how it functions. So that's going to be it regarding a pretty quick crash course of how this render engine works. Uh, Please leave comments, questions, and your bugs that you've run across and potential positives and negatives and all that kind of stuff in the comment section here, just so that we can all uh, participate in learning from you and the things that you've run across. Or if you want to know some more information from me regarding this or any sort of bugs that you've run into and some workarounds, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. Okay, so as promised, I am going to show you how to remove the Radeon ProRender add-on just in case it causes you a lot of issues or it's crashing your system or anything like that. It's very simple. All you really need to do is go into the wherever you have extracted your Radeon ProRender Windows installer package or wherever you have saved this. You will double click on that, go to the next, and then remove. I'm not going to do it because I want to keep it installed, but you'll do this. You'll follow what it says to do. Make sure that you have Blender closed down before you do this. So remove the files and finish that up. And when you're done with that, since I'm canceling it, it says, are you sure you want to cancel? Yes. Okay. Then make sure that you also uninstall the Radeon Pro material library as well, just in case any of that bit of the add-on is also causing Blender to crash. So if you do find that your Blender sessions still keep crashing, what you want to do is you'll want to go into this location here. So you'll want to go to Windows, or wherever you've saved all of your programs, whatever your program drive is or your boot drive, you want to go down to the users right here. You'll want to go to whatever the login, wherever that is saved. Then in here, go to View, and then you'll want to click Hidden Items because where it is located is in a hidden location. So then you'll go into here where it says App Data, Roaming, Blender Foundation, and then go into the Blender folder, and then whatever version you have installed that on. So it might be in all of them, it might be in one of them, whatever it is, go inside of there and then go into Scripts. That's where your add-ons folder is, and that's where it lives. So if you still see a folder in there after you've uninstalled it and it's causing Blender to crash constantly, this is what you want to do. You want to delete this folder. That way, once that is done, I would say, this way you make sure that it's completely removed from your Blender system or from the program. Try, restarting your computer and then opening up Blender again, and it should resolve all those issues. I had a lot of issues with this when I had both Nvidia and AMD video cards installed on my computer. Now it's not an issue, so I use it. But just keep that in mind if you do run into issues with crashes using this particular add-on. So thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell icon so that you get notifications when a new video has been released. And let me know what other kind of content you'd like to see. And I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.